Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. Australians' views on the economy and their own situations were mixed this week, but support for the government remained strong. In a week that saw the stunning Aston by-election result, support for the Albanese government in Victoria is really strong, giving the ALP a massive lead. The ALP on 59.5% compared to the Coalition on only 40.5% on a two-party preferred basis. And in metropolitan Melbourne, support for the government is even stronger, with the ALP on 60.5%, ahead of the Coalition on 39.5%. The strong support for the Albanese government was reflected in the by-election result in the Melbourne suburban seat of Aston on the weekend, when the government of the day won a seat from the opposition for the first time in over 100 years. On a national level, two-party preferred support for the ALP was down a little this week by 2.5 percentage points to 54.5%, but still well ahead of the Coalition on 45.5%. There's more good news for the federal government with a strong bounce back for government confidence this week, up 8 points to 95, although that's still below the neutral level of 100. And there are still more Australians who now say the country's heading in the wrong direction, 44%, than the right direction, 39%. Although consumer confidence improved this week, it was up by 1.6 points to 78.2, it remains very low and well below the neutral level of 100. And in fact, this is the lowest consumer confidence we've seen the week before an RBA meeting since the central bank started raising interest rates nearly 12 months ago. We'll be watching consumer confidence closely over the next week to gauge the reactions of Australians to the Reserve Bank's decision on interest rates today. The largest impact of interest rate increases has unsurprisingly, consistently been felt by Australians paying off their mortgage. Perhaps sensing the Reserve Bank may once again increase interest rates today, the consumer confidence of people paying off their homes dipped by 2.1 points to 70.5 this week. In contrast, there were increases for homeowners and renters, which is what lifted the overall index. Inflation expectations? Well, overall inflation expectations were up 0.3% to 5.7% this week, in line with the 4-week average, also 5.7%. A real concern to policymakers will be the lift in inflation expectations over recent weeks, after averaging 5.3% during the months of January and February. The ANZ Roy Morgan Inflation Expectations Index, that's what Australians expect inflation to be annually over the next couple of years, has been a good predictor of movements in the official inflation figures. These are released weeks or even months later. The index, that's the Inflation Expectations Index, correctly forecast a peak in inflation towards the end of last year and the decline early this year, as confirmed by recent ABS Consumer Price Index or CPI numbers. If Australians' inflation expectations continue increasing, this is likely to mean higher official inflation numbers in the months ahead, something policymakers certainly don't want to see. And there's good news on the employment front. The latest Roy Morgan employment estimates for March show employment increased, and it was led by a rise in full-time employment to a new record high of 9 million. So that's 9 million full-time employed Australians, while unemployment was down 0.7% to 9.4%. Underemployment was also down in the month by 0.3% to 8.8%. So overall, 2.9 million Australians are now either unemployed or underemployed, equivalent to 18.2% of the workforce. This is the second straight month we've seen increasing employment and a fall in unemployment and underemployment, largely reversing the spike that was seen in the preceding 2 months. As we mentioned a month ago, although the month-to-month movements are important, A look at the workforce trends over the last year shows the broader context as we emerge from the pandemic restrictions and deal with high inflation and rising interest rates. Compared to a year ago, almost everything in the Australian workforce is up. The workforce, made up of employed people and unemployed people, has increased by nearly 500,000 or 500,000 since March 2022. This includes a large increase of almost 200,000 more in employment and also a large increase in unemployment. That's up by 277,000 from a year ago. Within the employment market, full-time employment's increased by almost 300,000. Some of that increase has been at the expense of part-time employment, which has fallen as workers in part-time jobs move into full-time work. That's good. But underemployment, and a little confusingly, has also increased, up by 96,000 from a year ago. The picture is therefore mixed and really quite confusing. There are several factors driving this pattern. First, with immigration returning after being closed during the pandemic, people are entering Australia in record numbers. Some of them are employed and some of them are unemployed. Second, the mandatory COVID restrictions and COVID isolation payments ended in October 2022. And since then, workers have not been able to avoid work and still receive government COVID payments. Third, since forced COVID isolation policies were relaxed late last year, businesses have not been forced to hire as many workers to cover for sick workers. This has reduced hiring pressure in some areas of the labour market. Overall, the employment estimates show that the Australian workforce is growing rapidly and there are many new jobs being created. However, the size of the increase in the workforce means there are simply not enough new jobs being created for everyone entering the workforce. Hence the increase in unemployment and underemployment. Looking forward, the challenges of high inflation and rising interest rates are a new factor for businesses and consumers to deal with during 2023. As we saw last week, New South Wales has a new Premier, with Labor leader Chris Minns winning the state election. However, as we predicted, Minns has fallen short of a majority, winning either 45 or 46 seats in the Parliament. He needed 47. However, Minns has secured the support of key crossbenchers and will lead a Labor minority government over the next 4 years. This is exactly in line with Roy Morgan's pre-election analysis. For the poll watchers, the latest results from New South Wales Electoral Commission show with over 82% of the vote counted, the final result is lining up exactly with the final Roy Morgan poll of the electorate, which showed the ALP on 53.5% and a swing of 5.5%, well ahead of the coalition on 46.5%. This result means Roy Morgan has once again been the most accurate in predicting the will of the people. Roy Morgan was also the most accurate in predicting the result of last year's Victorian election. The results from both the recent New South Wales election and last year's Victorian election show the power and accuracy of Roy Morgan's Snap SMS polls. And that's a wrap for this week. Subscribe free to our Roy Morgan YouTube channel for all the latest political, economic and market research data and insights. Thanks for listening today, and I look forward to bringing you the latest data on consumer confidence, inflation expectations and voting intentions at the same time next week, and the reaction of Australians to the Reserve Bank's interest rate decision today. Take care and see you next Wednesday.